Hello, brother and sister Seamuses around the world over. Get your fedoras on and your 45s leveled, because this is the True Dicks podcast, where two reader authors discuss mystery, crime, and detective fiction through reviews, history, and the theory of craft. I'm CC Wall, author of the Black Star Canyon serial, and with me is John Oakes, author of the Death Pope books. Hello. And other stuff. I figured I would.
You listed off all your stuff, and I get one. I get one.
I just said Black Star Canyon.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, and
we got to do more podcasts so we can rotate through more of our.
That's what I'm saying. We can't just blow our load all on one episode. Oh,
God. Can you keep it professional? Talk about blowing loads. My mom might listen to this podcast. Good grief.
Well, don't.
5 minutes later, I'm like,
don't point it out.
Oh no,
we got to keep an air of mystery to this.
After we recorded the last podcast, Creep's wife messaged me and said, "See, that's what I have to put up with all the time." She loves it though. She loves it. And probably the listeners out there do too. Colorful language.
I'm no stranger to controversy.
All
right.
That doesn't surprise me. I've seen pictures of your old bands that used to play in.
Oh, wow.
Any Fox.
Yeah.
Right.
If there's a box, I'm living outside of it. You point to the box, and that's where I'll be. So today we're going to be talking about Mystery Origins, kind of the history of mystery part 1, and we'll be kind of delving into this as we go throughout the run of this show. And we're going to be talking about a couple books that you guys should go out there and pick up. But first, I want to show you something for those of you who are watching on the stupendous video feed. Look at this thing. Oh, yes, it is the 37th annual vintage paperback collectible show and sale. And it just happens to be on April 3rd, really close to my house. And I'm going to go to it. Now, the thing that makes it scary is that it's also the same day as WrestleMania. But I know how much John likes talking about WrestleMania. But if you notice, it ends at 4. WrestleMania starts at 5.
Are you going to go live? Is it actually in LA?
Yeah, it's right down. It's not right down the street, but it's like 10 minutes from here.
Cool, and you're going live?
So,
going to watch it live? Sweet.
I'm gonna. Well, not WrestleMania, the vintage paperback
show.
Oh,
okay, yeah.
Yeah, there's a ton of authors that are going to be there, but I'm more interested in. I got to find out who it is, but we went to this bookstore in Glendale because on our last episode I was 37, and now I'm 38.
Woo.
So, yay. So I went to this bookstore. I think it was called Mystery and Imaginatarium or some crap like that. It's in Glendale. Yeah.
Or something. I don't know. It's structure with
huge,
books inside.
and it has so much shit, and I spent way too much money. And I'm happy with my purchases. Oh, I should even show you. These are the two that I'm most excited about. Carter Brown, The Brazen.
By Carter Brown? Okay.
And The Restless Hands by Bruno Fisher. Now, these are like first editions, and this is 1949, and this one's 1960. So I'm really geeked out on those. So,
I'm not as geeked out as you are on that sort of thing, but for a while there, about 10 years ago, I got really into James Bond books. and there's a great used bookstore in downtown Spokane where I grew up. And occasionally I would just sort of go there and see which James Bond Signet classics were popping up. And I got, I think, like 11 or 12 of them out of the series. So I had a pretty decent collection going. And then at some point I was like, I don't know, started to feel bad for all the misogyny and all the racism in James Bond. And I think I just sort of moved on to other things before I completed the collection.
Yeah, James Bond, that's I like, that's why I like the Nick Carter books, because it's like the same kind of stuff, but it's not so snooty and uppity. So and I have 49 Nick Carter books now.
Jeez.
So I'm almost at 270 or however many there are.
I need to see if there's any good used bookstores around here. I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota, if you didn't know that already. I'm sure they've, it's a literate town.
You know what? I think there is, because a buddy of mine who lives in Minneapolis has been picking up the Arkham House books, and he's been talking about that. So
yeah, I mean, used bookstores might even be easier than the library for some of these types of books we're talking about.
Yeah.
But made a good library haul the other day. I went and got a couple Donald Westlake books, picked up an Elmore Leonard, and gonna try to read those to have them to review later on. I picked up Donald Westlake. Did I mention this last week? Maybe I did. But he's supposed to be one of the funnier authors, so I'm looking forward to digging into that. But today I was going to talk about the Hap and Leonard novels.
Hit it.
I read 3 of them. I think there's now 8. The 8th one just came out. The author is Joe Lansdale. Seems like a pretty cool cat, living down in Texas, East Texas, kicking ass and writing books. He's really into karate and martial arts and all that stuff. And it really shows in his books, because Hap and Leonard, the title characters for the series, Hap Collins and Leonard Pine. Leonard is a Vietnam vet, black and gay, living in East Texas in the 80s when the books start. So not the easiest situation. So you have a very compelling character right there. And then Hap Collins. Hap is he's not a man-child. He's just a guy who doesn't seem to really want to put his life together. I think at some point in the books he realized, women are always disappointed in him because he lacks ambition, to some extent. So what usually motivates Hap, I think Hap is like the POV character for the stories. What motivates Hap in these stories is often concern for a friend. And that's what starts him out on a mystery. Or adventure, whatever you want to call these novels. And sometimes that's concern for Leonard. And Leonard kind of doesn't give a crap about anyone or anything except Hap sometimes. And that's why Leonard will, he'll get them in trouble with his mouth by, antagonizing people. And that's what's cool about Leonard, because he'll stand right in front of a small town sheriff in East Texas in the 80s. And the guy's calling him all sorts of names. And Leonard will just sling it right back, even though the guy's got a gun on his hip and could, So obviously they get in some fights, and that's where you see that karate expertise come in from Joe Lansdale. Sometimes you got to kick a fool upside the head, So if you into that sort of stuff in books, it definitely delivers. I'll just talk about the first book today. The first book was called Savage Season, which is such a cool name for a book, and it's got a cool cover. And so Hap and Leonard are just going about their lives, and they doing field work, just paying the bills, making some beer money. When Hap's old flame walks in, and this is the kind of character who, Hap knows it's going to be trouble. Leonard knows it's going to be trouble, but Hap just finds himself getting sucked back in anyways. And her name's Trudy, and she's got a plan that's going to make them a ton of money. And Hap reluctantly gets a reluctant Leonard to join in the search for this lost money. And so you got these Trudy's working with these super hippie folks, you know, who are still keeping the cause alive into the 80s. And they've got some, they're not criminals. They're kind of very, very not criminal. And so it's kind of funny for Hap and Leonard, who are kind of badass, to be like, who are these jokers? And they think they're going to do what, you know, with this money? I think that's what it was. They were going to use the money to fund the revolution, you know, as they saw it. And Hap and Leonard were just there to get their cut. So like a couple $100,000 or something. And so, yeah, it's definitely fun. There's a mystery element in that to find the money, they have to kind of solve some geographical questions. It's definitely not a detective mystery, which later books they kind of, yeah, it's definitely crime general. In later books, they do take on the role of a detective, certainly the amateur sleuth. But in this one, it was more of like a crime adventure, gritty, kick some ass, shoot 'em up kind of thing. And I tell you what stood out for me. There weren't many things I disliked about the book, actually. I thought it was, you know, it set out what it wanted to be. You know, it said, I'm this kind of book, and then it did that. And I always liked that. You know, when I see someone using conventions in their writing style that I'm like, that's different, or that seems kind of sloppy. Sometimes I kind of go with it to see if it's what's the word? Consistent, right? So if it's consistent through the whole book, and if it starts to add to the flavor of the book, and so yeah, I definitely found that to be the case. You know, there's a lot of dialogue, which I like. I like books that have snappy dialogue. And Hap and Leonard have some good conversations, you know, talking smack between each other and and everyone else, you know, within arm's reach. So, yeah, the dialogue, the characters were interesting. And when I finished the book, I didn't expect to have a moment of sort of catharsis, you know, a really thoughtful, almost kind of deep moment at the end of kind of what seems on the surface like a very simple novel. You know, it seems like a simple story, but those are usually sometimes the deepest ones, right? The ones that don't talk fancy and that don't try to flip around all these crazy genre conventions, you know. And so I really highly recommend the book. There really wasn't much that I thought was poorly done. The second book, I do have some criticisms, actually, so maybe we'll talk about that next week. But this one is definitely a 2 thumbs up. Go read this shit. It's good stuff. Good stuff. And it gave me lots to think about as I move ahead in my own crime writings. So I will say this to finish. For me personally, Joe Lansdale's writing style, sometimes I read it and I'm like, holy crap, that sounds like I just wrote that. And so that was really interesting, reading an author who's very, very accomplished, doing things that I go, you know, when I look at my own work and I'm like, no one's ever going to read this, you know. It's kind of comforting to see someone who has found success doing A, B, and C that I do a little bit different than other people. So I think every author needs to find those sorts of touchstones to keep them creatively, I don't know, pure, you know, to their own flavor. You know, you gotta write to genre convention, sure, to market or whatever, but you gotta keep something in there that's all you. So yeah, Savage Season by Joe Lansdale, 2 thumbs up.
Isn't he I know he's a martial artist and all that stuff, but isn't he like some like champion or something like that? And
I don't know. I know he's very invested in it. I think he owns. Does he own a couple gyms down in Texas? But I know he's a lifelong martial artist. So if he had won some championships, I would not be shocked in the slightest.
Nice.
But he eventually won the Edgar Award. He's won multiple Bram Stoker awards because he dabbles in horror. But I think he won the Edgar Award for his novel The Bottoms, which was released, I think, in 2010. So it's kind of cool to see him, even as he gets older, you know, now he's in his 60s, to see him still developing his craft and writing awesome and more awesome stuff. So definitely an author to look up to.
Right on, man. Well,
Oh, sorry. Hap and Leonard is now a TV series. It just started this month on the Sundance channel, which I don't have cable, so I don't know what channel that is. But yeah, you can enjoy it in TV form if that tickles you. Do you got Christina?
You haven't seen it yet?
I watched like 5 minutes of it.
Okay.
You got Christina Hendricks from Mad Men. You've got James Purefoy, who I don't love him as Hap, but he's good. He's a great actor. You might have seen him in Rome or a bunch of other stuff where they needed a steamy Brit to play a leading male role. And then you got, Michael K. Williams cast as Leonard, which is freaking perfect. And if you don't know who Michael K. Williams is, he's Omar Little from The Wire. So basically, he's going to be amazing in anything. So.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And then there's some other familiar faces you'll see in there. Like, the really creepy guy from the McPoyles in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. The oldest McPoyle brother plays one of the villains in this. And I thought that was really good casting. So
Omar in The Wire is amazing.
Oh, he's one of the best. One of the best
like
TV
the
characters
character
ever.
on that show. Yeah.
One of the best.
Oh. Okay. Well, I'm going to talk about I, the Jury by Mickey Spillane, which is the first Mike Hammer book. Now, for those of you who don't know Mike Hammer, just a little history on Mike Hammer for me. I didn't like Mike Hammer and didn't want to like Mike Hammer because when I was a kid, my mom used to watch the Mike Hammer TV show with Stacy Keach, and I don't like that guy. And there's like a couple guys that I just don't like for some reason. Him and Tom Atkins are like two of the people that like I would run over with my car if I saw them on the street. And I don't know if it's because I would have to watch these shows with my mom, or I couldn't watch what I wanted to watch because shows of them would be on, or I think the Tom Atkins one has to do with the mean stepdad and Creep Show, who throws away the kids' comic books. But
I'm not familiar with Tom Atkins.
He was in he's like a B movie actor. He was in The Fog, Night of the Creeps. He plays like especially in the 80s in horror movies, he played the older hard-boiled detective who was trying to solve a crime or something. He was in Halloween 3. He just like annoys the fucking shit out of me. But Stacy Keach and him have that same thing about him that just makes me want to just pull people's teeth out. And I don't know why. But with that said, when I picked up I, the Jury, just to give it a shot because I've heard so much about it, I was so pleasantly surprised. And one of the reasons is because of all the hard-boiled American detectives that have been portrayed, especially up until that point, he just is a killer. And he doesn't, he cares, and there's parts where he feels kind of bad for it, but he feels like he's almost like the bottom of the heap. Like, if he has to kill you, it's because the law failed and everything else failed. And so it's his duty to just rub you out. And in doing so, no, he's a private detective, and he's kind of a brute asshole drunk, but somehow, and he always comes across as dirty and wrinkled, like just like he woke up in a trash can, clothes are all wrinkled and all this other shit, but he always is banging chicks left and right. It's ridiculous, like how women fall for this guy. And he's just such a, I don't know. But anyway, so I, the Jury starts off with this crime scene at a murder, and there's a bunch of cops there, and they bring him in to look at the body, and they do it because the victim is one of his really good friends.
Hmm.
And so in a room full of cops, he basically says, he makes a promise to the dead guy that when he finds who killed him, he's gonna fucking kill him. And the cops are like, you can't actually say that. And he's like, I can do whatever the fuck I want on Mike Hammer, and rah. And it's just like, I paraphrase, but like,
what year was
so
this set?
he just goes on this, like, he's just amazing. Like, I'm never bored. I'm like, I read this book in a day. It was like, I couldn't put it down. And
What year was it set?
I think it was published in 46.
Okay.
So he's a vet, war vet, and but I mean, this guy, he never runs out of cigarettes. He's always got a drink in his hand. He's always pulling his 45 out and smoking some dude or chick or whatever. And the fun thing about Mike Hammer books too is that as the mystery is going and the characters are brought up and all the red herrings and all this stuff, when you read it, you almost know from the beginning most likely who the killer is, but how he comes to it is always the shock.
Mm.
You know, it always seems kind of cut and dry, but how he comes up with it, and then usually when he comes up with it, like, it's usually on the last page, there's like a little twist he throws in there. Like, I don't want to ruin anything on any of the other books, but let's just say, like, he will just pop off and go like, and you're his son. And you're like, whoa, how the hell did that happen? There's always like one little thing. And they're so fun. And I repeat this 100 times. If you're interested in this book, whatever you do not go to Wikipedia and try to find out information on this book, because on the Wikipedia page in the first line, it tells you who the killer is. So if you're interested in this book, do not look it up. But the other thing is that it's been made into movies and all this other stuff. But when this book came out, it sold 6 million copies or something like that. It became the highest selling mystery book up until that point. And a lot of like the critics and stuff like that hated it because of how violent and sexual and all this other stuff it is, because it's super violent. Like, instead of just like punching a guy, he'll ram the barrel of a gun into their teeth and break their teeth out.
Oh,
you know, it's like, he's not like a nice guy when it comes to that. But so the critics hated it, but again, usually when critics hate something,
right,
the masses flock to it, and I love them. I love those books, and I've been reading them one after another. So, yay, it's a goodie.
I'm definitely eager to read some Mickey Spillane. He's one of those names that I've heard all my life, but you just associate it with the sort of older, you know, pulpier version of novels, and never intended to read it, but it's kind of fun to know.
One of the other neat things about Mickey Spillane is that he's like one of the only authors that was able to play his main character in a film based on his book. If that makes any sense. He actually played Mike Hammer in a couple things.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, which is
was
just
he an
like
okay actor?
Bonkers. I actually haven't seen those. I'm wanting to look them up and take a look at them, but I have a feeling if I hate them, it's going to put a bad taste in my mouth. So I want to finish all the Mike Hammer books.
Stacy Keach played Mike Hammer later on?
Yeah. He actually played Mike Hammer in like 3 or 4 TV movies and in 3 different TV series, which is weird. But like, so basically from the 80s through the early 2000s, Mike Hammer and that guy were fucking synonymous, which is just, ugh. But whatever.
You still not like Stacy Keach?
I'm getting to like it a little bit more. And like Zoe would always make fun of me. She's like, and now you're gonna picture Stacy Keach the whole time you're reading that book. Da, 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 da. And I'm like, I actually don't. So that's good. But anyhow. So
he's
yeah.
got a new sitcom that's starting where it's Jeffrey Warburton, is that his name?
I don't know.
And the waitress from True Blood, they're married and they got kids, and her parents are moving in with them. And it's Stacy Keach and someone else. It's kind of a classic,
Of course it is.
Really
did you ever watch? Did you ever watch Titus?
Yeah, I love Titus.
I liked
awesome.
him in that. Like, as Titus's dad that lived in the house or whatever.
Every role he's ever played, he's just an asshole.
Yeah.
So, maybe that's why, because maybe Mike Hammer, like maybe people my age don't know Mike Hammer, but like all his career, he was probably living in Mike Hammer's shadow to some extent.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, you watched that Dick Spanner thing, right? That kid show. Isn't that the shit?
That's pretty funny.
So good. He's like, I took the case, and then for like 10 minutes, he's dragging a suitcase behind him. He's like, it's raining cats and dogs, and cats and dogs are falling, and then he's like, and then it just started to rain. It's hysterical, dude. I was cracking up on that. I can't believe
I gotta blow my nose. I don't want to keep sniffing into the microphone. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So, yeah, if you want to see the Dick Spanner thing, it was a kid show from '86 that played in the UK, and I have no idea how it was a kid show. But if you just go on YouTube and look up Dick Spanner episodes, you'll be able to find it. It's like stop motion. It's really, really good. I enjoy it. I enjoyed it a lot. Just found it recently. So watch
kind of
this.
getting some allergies.
And that's the meaning of life.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry. What were you saying?
I realized I never actually brought my microphone closer to me. It's been 2 feet away from me this whole time. Probably doesn't matter. It's supposed to be good. It's one of these things, snowballs.
Oh, yeah. Holy crap.
The sound quality just isn't that good. I think someday I'll need to invest in something better. Anyway, so I guess
I used the microphone on my earbuds.
That's hilarious.
I'm super professional over here.
Yeah. So we were going to dig in a little bit to the history of the mystery. It's kind of funny. Dig it. Get your shovels. What's kind of funny is that, you look at romance and you could say, okay, well, that genre's been around since, the 1200s, Renaissance poems and all that stuff. You can start to see romantic themes and, other genres you can pinpoint, okay, well, science fiction really got started at this point in time. With mystery, it seems like it really only popped up in the last 200 years. And what I read, what caught my interest immediately was that it coincided with, Wikipedia says the British Renaissance. And I was like, by the British Renaissance, you mean people got literate? I mean, what I think is more compelling is the idea that people were moving to cities for the first time. With the rise of the Industrial Revolution, people were moving away from agrarian work into the cities, into factories and support services. And when people had been living rurally, your communities were never that large. So everybody knew each other. And if there was someone, who was themselves appointed the constable, someone kills their wife, it's the husband, you hang him. Everybody comes out, has a party. People were really weird in those days. But there was such a public nature to life. Like everything, there was a lot more sharing in communities, a lot more dependence on one another. And for that same reason, whenever crimes were committed, they were more personal in nature because everybody was, related through family and many, many years of cohabitation. So then people start moving into cities, and all of a sudden nobody knows anyone anymore. And that changed the way crime had to be dealt with in society. And so you get the advent of structured police forces in the 1800s. People who, even though they weren't called that, then the detective starts to emerge as a policing tool. And then when you really see the sort of breakout of the mystery genre is after this has been going on for decades, with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle penning the Sherlock Holmes adventures. But what's really interesting is that you can actually go a little bit further back and point to some interesting people as being the real progenitors of the mystery genre. The first one that was surprising was Voltaire. Now, anybody who took European history in high school, at some point you're going to talk about Voltaire. He was a French figure of the, what about the Revolution? The French Renaissance. No, not the Renaissance, the Romantic period. Oh, geez. I got to stop smoking crack. Put that on the list. Voltaire, big figure. You've heard of him. Most famous for his work, Candide. He was a very funny guy, a very, very sharp critic of the church, back then the institutionalized Catholic Church. He was a proponent of reason. And the idea of reason was getting hot. He was one of the people that helped push that reason-first approach that led to our modern scientific techniques, that, if we're going to call it a British Renaissance, that especially in Scotland, which is actually the hub, I think, of the British, so-called British Renaissance. It was actually kind of a Scottish Renaissance, and the English were just kind of catching along, catching a ride. And that's when we also see the rise of other famous Scottish philosophers like Adam Smith, who's, they say the father of modern economics. Anyways, so Voltaire actually wrote another piece called Zadig, which critically is acclaimed up there with Candide. And it's kind of, I'm really interested to kind of see if there's a translation in English. He wrote this in 1748, and it was, again, a semi-satirical piece. He said it in ancient Babylon, but like with no real attempt to make it historical. He wasn't really too tied to the facts. He was really trying to make satirical points about society and government and all that. And the vehicle he chose to make his points was a detective going on the search to, solve some crime. And so I'm really interested to see how he did that. And that's pointed to as the first mystery novel by some. And then there was another one in 1819 published by a German author named E.T.A. Hoffmann, and that's Das Fräulein von Scuderi. And this, or Mademoiselle Scuderi in French. It was set in Paris and published in German, I think, but about a young woman who solved some crime. I didn't get a chance to read about it. But so we kind of jumped from 1748 to 1819, and that's like, okay, 70 years in between these two stories. And then we get to Murders in the Rue Morgue by Edgar Allan Poe. Now, when I think of Poe, I think of horror and, the casks of Amontillado and that big swinging blade that like is slowly lowering, all that stuff from when I read Poe in high school. But he's actually attributed to be the sort of father of the detective story, even though, interesting fact, in 1841, when Murders in the Rue Morgue was published, the term detective wasn't even in use. So one thing I want to learn for next week is actually the origin and etymology of the word detective.
Nice.
And figure out when that actually became not only used in fiction, but in real life too. And so, yeah, I think that, like I said, I want to learn more about these things. But you get Voltaire, Hoffmann, and then Poe, as they're kind of like, they're many, many years apart, but critics see influences on each other. And there's a couple other ones in there that I didn't talk about. But they're kind of, if Arthur Conan Doyle hit the grand slam with Sherlock Holmes that kicked off the mystery and detective genre, Voltaire, Hoffmann, and Poe, you could say, loaded the bases for him. You know, they were kind of preparing the ground, starting certain tropes and ideas. And actually, Murders in the Rue Morgue, I guess, is a short story. It wasn't a very long story, but it had a big impact. So yeah, I guess that's what we could call the pre-Sherlock phase.
Yeah,
as
for
this
sure.
It emerges from the mist of the end of the Reformation? No, good Lord, seriously, stop smoking crack. I've lost so many brain cells. I don't know if it's lack of sleep, parenting,
It's the crack.
I bet parenting is probably worse for your brain than crack.
I really think it is. I was much smarter before I had kids.
But I'll go ahead and pin down some of my history. It's actually really embarrassing for me to forget like whole, eras of history because I used to have that shit on lockdown.
Yeah, explain your background because you're a genius.
Technically, yeah, I guess. I was in Mensa for a while, but then I got sick of paying a yearly fee to be in a group for smart people. I was like, that's not very smart. If I got to pay $50 to you assholes, then I'm not that smart, am I? So I quit that shit. But I've been kind of addicted to learning all my life, and so did my bachelor's degree real fast when I was young. Then I was kind of like, oh crap, I should have enjoyed school. And then I kind of went back and did a study abroad in France. And then I kept taking classes just to take classes. Literally, who does that? And then eventually I was like, all right, screw this. I just need to go to grad school. And so in 2008, I after traveling more in the intervening years, I decided to go get a PhD in geography because geography, it's kind of the study of everything. You're looking at change over space versus change over time. It's the x-axis to history's y-axis, and I'm very interested in history. So I enjoyed the historical aspects of it, very into sociology and economics, and that's what I ended up focusing on. And really about people, I think that comes through in my writing too. So I was, as far as research methods, I was very into, one-on-one interviews and amassing large amounts of personal stories into sort of larger narratives where themes emerged. So, I did my PhD specifically on human migration in sub-Saharan Africa, stayed in Cape Town, South Africa on my actual research trip, and on a trip before I tooled around all over Southern Africa. But in Cape Town was where I did my main research and just talked to a lot of people about a lot of crazy stuff. One of the more enlightening, phases of my life. And I think that's to bring it back to why I'm interested in mystery, because mystery is one of those genres where you keep the focus on the people. And my favorite mysteries are ones where they have a neat plot and some plot twists. But as I always say, no one ever names their kid after a fucking plot twist, right? If you name your kid Poirot, or even if you name your dog Poirot, it's because Poirot is an awesome character. And the mystery stories where I have been the most invested are the ones where I find the characters the most appealing or interesting. And I mean, it's mystery, man. Mystery draws us in. Mystery can make you love a character. Literally, what you don't know about the character can make you love them. And Poirot is a great example of that because he's very reserved. He doesn't really talk about himself very much. And so, that's a little bit more about me and kind of why I'm getting drawn more into this subject in this phase of my writing career.
Well, right on, man. Well, to kind of add to what you were talking about the pre-Sherlock period, when I first started digging into this stuff and finding out really how infantile detective fiction is compared to everything else, like just the world in general, a couple hundred years, it's kind of mind-boggling. And especially I think because for me, the majority of
sci-fi fantasy is younger, to be fair.
Well, yeah. But I'm just saying, like,
they're kind of about the same rate if you look at it. But that's a topic for a different day. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, totally. I mean, because and then you go with spokes in a wheel kind of thing, because like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and stuff. You know, what's that? 1816. You know what I'm saying? Like it's kind of sci-fi, but at the same time, it's kind of gothic-y romance and all this other stuff. But anyway, what I'm getting at was I think it's hysterical that the reason that we have what we have now is because the Catholic Church was printing different translations of the Bible. Like it all kind of goes back to that. And then the funniest thing about that is the Catholic Church wanted everyone kind of to fear them, and not fear them in general, but just like be their people who didn't know anything and had to always look to them for advice and what to do and everything. But
in what sense does the printing different translations of the Bible, what do you mean by that?
Because before 200 years ago, really the only thing that people were really reading was the Bible, and the Bible was being read to them because most people were illiterate.
Right.
So as
you could argue it was more than 200 years ago, because that was why the printing press was one of the biggest reasons for the Protestant Reformation, and that printing press came around over 500 years ago.
Yeah, but literacy wasn't what's the word I'm looking for here? Prevalent. There's a good way.
Or encouraged, yeah.
Or encouraged.
Well, and that's what I was saying, is that part of the rise of the mystery genre, what kind of coincided with literacy throughout Europe.
Yeah, and then as like newspapers were being printed and people were seeing things that were going on, the people realized, the publishers of the newspapers realized very quickly that whenever a crime would be committed that was grisly, let's say, they would sell a lot more newspapers.
And we take it for granted. It'd be interesting to be the guy who figured out that stuff sells, you know?
No shit, right?
Wait a second. You would think that the people would be horrified, but no, they come with spoons in hand, ready to shovel more of this disgusting stuff into their mouths.
Yeah, and I think honestly that's where Poe came from, because I can't really recall if he was more of a journalist at that point before he started actually writing stories or anything. But
I'll put that on the list of questions for next week.
Yeah, he was
what
there.
What the fuck was Poe up to?
Yeah, what was Poe doing before he was Poe? But basically, he was one of the people who saw that, oh yeah, like
the macabre
if I write something kind of grisly, people are gonna fucking buy it. And that's kind of when he started putting and I think Rue Morgue, if I'm not mistaken, was published in like a magazine newspaper-ish kind of thing in sections, kind of like how Dickens was doing the newspaper serials and stuff like that.
Do you think that Poe's decisions were motivated by that sort of reasoning, or was he? Because I always just imagined him as a creepy motherfucker who had to tell some creepy ass stories.
I think the poetry side of him was probably his feelings and what he yearned for, but I think the tales were what kind of put money in his pocket and food on his table. And so as the more fucked up the stories got, the more money he made, he probably just spiraled out of fucking control. Because I mean, he wasn't really that well in the head to begin with, I don't think. But Murders in the Rue Morgue was the first mystery thing I ever read, and I only read it because when I was in junior high, I was digging on The Raven and his poetry and stuff like
That
that.
doesn't shock me at all.
Yeah. But so that just it's kind of a mind-boggling thing, the series of events that led to people reading en masse and people purchasing fiction to read in a mass market sense. So that's kind of where I think we
Yeah, I want to look into that some more. Because that is fascinating.
There's a couple other people like Wilkie Collins, The Woman in White, and The Moonstone.
Mm-hmm. I read about that.
Yeah, I picked those up, so I'm gonna give those a read. And hopefully we'll have a little bit more on that before our next little gander here. But yeah, man, it's fascinating the more you look into it. And I mean, I'm assuming, I do want to say too, on a completely other note, I was listening back to our last show and I made a very generalized comment that I think will upset people. And this is probably going to be the only time I apologize for anything I say, but because it was on the first episode, I would really like to apologize for it. I made a statement that most female detectives were butchy in fiction. And that is definitely not true. It's just in the fiction that I'm reading, most of the females are kind of butchy. So I just wanted to make that clear because, I mean, you have Nancy Drew and Miss Marple and you have goddamn Murder, She Wrote. And, you know, so I didn't want to kind of jump on the thing that all girls are butches.
Right.
That was not at all what I was trying to say.
The way I took that was that coming from an author's perspective, I thought you were saying that those authors were being a little bit lazy in saying, well, to be a strong feminine character, she has to have male attributes. I thought that's what you were. I thought you were critiquing from a feminist point of view.
I think and this is another generalization based on what I've read, but I think in the late 40s and 50s, that's exactly right. I don't think it was like that in the beginning, and I don't think it ended up like that. But I think there was that period, especially in the pulp era, which we're going to probably do a whole show about, especially with the rise of like lesbian pulp and stuff like that. You did get a lot of stuff like that, which, you know, is a topic for another day, but for sure we will get into that because that's like a very big feather in my cap. That might not have been the right thing to say there.
I'll take casual sexism and put that feather in my cap. Yeah, that's not what you were going for. So, as we end the podcast, I got to ask you, what the fuck is that brother and sister Seamus's thing you say at the beginning of the podcast?
Oh, the Seamus. That's just like another little, what's the word? It's like another word for private dick. Private investigator.
Weird. I've never heard that one. A Seamus?
A Seamus. Yeah.
I'll have to look that up.
Yeah. I might just change it to Dicks, but I don't want to say
Brother and Sister Dicks.
Podcast.
We don't want to confuse people because the readers, people who like this podcast and they're just mystery readers, they're not dicks. They're not detectives. So the double entendre doesn't work. You're just insulting them.
Yeah.
So we got to think about this. But apart from that, what I really like about the podcast so far is being able to kind of hop on, you know, like from touchstone to touchstone, or like you're hopping across a pond on those rocks, whatever they call them. I can't talk English. But to kind of come on the podcast, discuss what we think we figured out, figure out what we're not so sure about, and then I'm just making notes on what I want to learn or, you know, bear down on for next week. So I dig that. I think it's kind of an organic flow of how anybody would learn about something. So,
and it's like interesting for people to listen to, but it's probably more interesting for us to do it and then go, oh, we should look into that more.
Let's face it, it's probably the most interesting thing that any of these listeners will experience in their pathetic, meaningless lives. On that note,
Now, right
talk
there,
to you
you
later.
should actually write for WWE because that's how they're keeping. That's awesome. Okay, so with that said, until next time, everybody, keep those dicks private. That is so good. And again, the less attention we draw to stuff, the better it is. And we got to figure out what day we're actually going to do this, but we should do that off the air.
Do what?